What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Bobo Nightblade build. So the Bobo build is to see a little bit of a nerf in Elsweyr just due to the changes to the Spider Silk synergy, the Shadow Silk synergy, which has basically changed a little bit. So while it does more consistent DPS, it does less DPS overall. That being said, Bobo builds are still quite powerful, and they are very competitive with Magicka builds for those sort of ranged builds where you need to be stepped away from the group, but you still kind of want to play stamina DPS. So on the very end game levels, Bobo builds are still very nice. Again, if you still want to be a stamina DPS, but you don't really want to play your typical dual wield bow build. If you do want to play a actual stamina DPS and pull as much DPS as you can, you still want to stick with the dual wield bow. But for those instances where, let's say, like your stamina DPS is your main character, and you want to do like Asylum hard mode, you might want to consider running a Bobo build. That way you can still play at range and not really have to worry too much about the mechanics that would typically be a little bit more dangerous for somebody who's doing dual wield bow instead. So pretty nice build overall. A little bit has changed in this build, but overall pretty much stayed more or less exactly the same as it was in previous patches. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over skills, gear, attributes, everything you need to know, and basically recreate this build yourself. Not many gear options for Bobo builds, just because of a couple limitations with the build itself, mainly the fact that you do need to have some form of minor force, whether that's through channel acceleration or the use of Tzogvin's warband. So there is some gear limitations there, so I will discuss that a little bit in length. And then we'll go over the parse on a 21 million dummy, so you guys can get an idea of what sort of raid parts you can expect to see with a Bobo build. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So in terms of gear, a couple of things have changed, mainly because Tzogvin's does give us the physical penetration, and with a couple of experimentation and also asking around a couple of people who typically play Bobo builds in sort of very endgame content, we did swap the front bar trait to precise, so we did need to make up for that penetration somewhere. Otherwise we would have to put a lot of points into piercing, which does end up being quite offsetting. So this is basically what I have found to be a little bit better. It's actually still pretty even compared to the previous builds, but this is just a little bit stronger. So one-piece Velidreth and one-piece Kra'gh. You can still go with two-piece Velidreth if you would like. Again, the main drawback of using this of the Monster Helm sets right now is that there's not very good ranged stamina options outside of maybe Stormfist, but Velidreth is still pretty decent. So if you want to do two-piece Velidreth, you certainly can, or two-piece Stormfist, which is going to be definitely the weakest option there. But it does give you a little bit more sustain with the additional stamina regen on the one-piece there. But one piece Kra'gh gives us that physical penetration, and then one piece Velidreth with additional weapon damage. For our body set, we're still running with Relequens, still going to be the strongest set for any stamina DPS really, as long as you're able to maintain the stacks on a single target, which should be fairly easy. You don't really have to worry about going off target because your bow does allow you to hit targets out from quite a ways, so it's a little bit better here even on like trash fights or fights with a lot of adds, because you pretty much can think of yourself as sort of a stamina Magicka build, more or less. Then for our second set, we are running Tzogvin's. So this comes from Frostvault, so you do need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC to grab this set here. This is nice because it gives us that minor force, so much like our previous Bobo build in Wrathstone, we do get the minor force here, so that does free up one of our slots, so we don't have to necessarily use it on something like Channel Acceleration and waste the global cooldown, or waste a lot of stamina by running lightweight beast trap instead. So really great build, a really great set here for our bow builds. So we have the jewelry, and then we have the front bar weapon. In terms of traits and enchants, still exactly what you'd see in your typical dual wield bow build in Elsweyr. So all divines, all stamina except for that one health enchant on a large piece. Jewelry, same thing, 3 bloodthirsty or 3 infused with weapon damage enchants here. Then for our front bar, we're going bow, so they're both bows, obviously. For the trait, we have precise. You can go with sharpened if you're going with two-piece Velidreth or two-piece Stormfist. You pretty much have to go with sharpened in order to get reasonable amount of CPs into piercing. And we are running the Double Ravage Health poisons here. I do need to make some more before we do the actual parse. But this is going to be the best option here. If you do want to do enchant, then you can do a poison damage enchant here instead of the double ravage health poisons. But the ravage health poisons are actually pretty easy to make. It uses fleshfly larva, nightshade, and nirnroot. That's the cheapest combination right there. So pretty easy, pretty cheap to make and to buy. So definitely use this in order to maximize your overall DPS. And the back bar is still the Maelstrom Bow infused with the weapon damage enchant here. Now, I have tried out Perfected Lokkestiiz on the front bar here. The main downside of running Lokkestiiz is that you most likely will either need to go sharpened here, or you will need to put a lot more points into piercing than what I have right now. That's because you are losing that physical penetration from the 4-piece on Tzogvins. Lokkestiiz does not have that. That being said, I ran Perfected Lokkestiiz, I ran Tzogvins, and the DPS parses were very similar, with Tzogvins pulling up a little bit ahead. We're talking maybe like 400 or 500 DPS on a 21 million raid dummy. So Tzogvins is going to be a little bit better. One of the main drawbacks of Lokkestiiz is you have to use synergies on your front bar unless you're running Lokkestiiz on the body. So that kind of limits, is a little bit of an additional limitation there. So just because Tzogvins does end up being very similar to Lokkestiiz in terms of overall parse, we're sticking with Tzogvin just because it's a much easier set both to obtain and also to obtain and maintain as well. The stacks of precision are pretty easy to maintain because it lasts for 10 seconds. The other potential sets options are pretty much all of your pretty standard sets in your bow build and your stamina builds in general. So you have Briarheart, for example. You have Hundings for your body set. You can go to VO if you have trouble sustaining. So a lot of different builds out there, I should say a lot of different sets out there for you to run. You can even go mechanical acuity if you would like, if you just want like a very fast crafted set to kind of go along. So something like Briarheart and mechanical acuity would be a pretty decent beginner's combination, so to speak, of a bow build setup there. Moving on to our character sheet. I am a Dark Elf, so still exact same races as you would for a typical meta dual wield bow build. So Orcs and Dark Elves are going to be the best options here. If you do want to kind of play around between both magic and stamina DPS, then the Dark Elves are going to be the best option. Otherwise, you can stick with Orcs. Orcs are definitely a very nice class right now, mainly because pretty much all stamina classes need to use Dubious, Camoran, Throne in order to, or Arteaum Takeaway Broth in order to fully sustain a light attack rotation, which does end up losing you a little bit of health. So the Orcs do have additional health in their racial passives, so that does allow you to run a max stamina enchant rather than a max health enchant on a large piece, because you do get the additional 1000 base health from the Orc passives there. But beyond those two classes, if you want to play a more sustain heavy class, you can go with Redguards or Bosmer. They still get the max stamina, 2000 max stamina, but they get more regen. They don't get the additional weapon damage that the Dark Elves or the Orcs have. If you also want to play a Nightblade tank on the side, you can also potentially grow with Imperials if you have access to the Imperial race. And then finally, you do have Khajiits as a kind of jack of all trades, master of none. If you do want to kind of flip-flop between all the different roles in the game, so magic and stamina DPS, tanking and healing, Khajiits are probably going to be your best option there. So quite a few options when it comes to races, but if you do want to min-max, Orcs or Dark Elves are going to be your best options there. For attributes, all of our points are into stamina here. Even though our health right now is sitting at about 16.3k or so, when we have Ebon and Minor Toughness up, we're sitting a little bit closer to about 17.5, 17.6k, which is definitely enough for vet trials. That being said, if you feel like you need some more survivability, you can shift a few points out of stamina into health, again, if you feel like you need that additional survivability there. For our Mundus, still going with the Shadow, still a very strong Mundus stone. Right now, one of the best for DPS. Arteaum Takeaway Broth is our food, so this gives us the max health, max stamina, and the stamina regen. If you can't afford Arteaum Takeaway Broth, you can run Dubious, Camoran, Throne. Just a little bit weaker, but it still gives you that stamina regen, max health. And again, this is the reason why Orcs are going to be a lot better, just because you are losing some health from running Arteaum Takeaway Broth, and so the additional health that you get from the Orc passive kind of helps offset that loss in health from the Arteaum Takeaway Broth or Dubious, Camoran, Throne. Now, I am a vampire, so vampires do get 10% additional stamina regen at stage 2, and at stage 3 you do get some damage mitigation when you're below a certain percentage health, but there is some downsides of being a vampire as well, namely the additional damage you take from fire damage, and the health and your health regen is lowered. So you can decide whether or not you need additional sustain or not. A Nightblade bow build actually has really nice sustain, so you might not even need to be a vampire in order to sustain the full light attack rotation, but the option is there if you decide to choose it. It's a little bit safer for a bow build because you're going to be a little bit farther away, so you have a little bit more time to react to certain mechanics. So it's a little bit easier on a bow build, but again, it's not absolutely necessary to min-max. Going over our skills. Starting off with our front bar, so I know Lyco has released a bow build that uses Killer's Blade, the idea being that you play at range and then when execute you kind of close that gap in and start using your execute. This particular build that I have is going to assume that you are playing at range the whole time, so we're not going in for any sort of execute moves or anything like that. So on our front bar we have Dark Shade. This has been changed so it does scale with our highest offensive stat, so now we are able to use this focused aim, or you can go with the other morph. Silver Leash, Relentless Focus, Rearming Trap, Flawless Dawnbreaker. As you can imagine, Rearming Trap and Silver Leash are really there for the additional weapon damage that you get from the Fighter Skill passive. So the only real moves we're going to be using on our front bar are going to be Dark Shade, Focused Aim, and Relentless Focus. On the back bar, we have Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Leeching Strikes. We're barring Relentless Focus again because we do need an Assassination ability here in order to maintain our Hemorrhage passive, which increases our critical damage by 10%. So it is important that we do have some Assassination ability on our back bar here, and the only one that really fits would be Relentless Focus. For ultimate, we're using Ballista. Again, we're assuming that we're staying all the way at range. We're not coming in at all for any sort of incapacitating strike or anything. So we are using Ballista as our primary ultimate there. If you do, for whatever reason, need a heal, you can take off Dark Shade and put on something like Vigor instead. And if you do want to play at melee range, so you want to kind of copy the Lyco thing, where you play at range until 25%, you go in for incap, then you would just replace Dark Shade with Killer's Blade and replace Ballista with Incapacitating Strike. Going over our champion points now. CP cap still 810, gives us 270 CP across each of our different constellation colors. Starting off with our green CPs, 100 Mooncalf, 75 Tenacity, that leaves 95 remaining points. So we have 33 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 31 Warlord. You can play around with your green CPs as you see fit. Definitely want to try to get 100 or 75 in the Mooncalf for the additional stamina regen. Tenacity is going to be less important. Like I said, Nightblade bow builds actually have very nice sustain, so it's not absolutely necessary that you put 75 in the Tenacity. For our blue CPs, so a little bit of an alteration here, but if you want to compare this to like a dual wield bow build, just because of the different damage sources that you have as a bow build. 64 Mighty, 36 into Piercing, 61 into Precise Strikes, 48 into Thaumaturge, and 61 into Master at Arms. Because Focused Aim is quite a strong move and it's our main spamble, we do want a little bit more into Master at Arms for the additional direct damage bonus. Finally, our red CPs. This is again a more balanced approach for those of you guys who are familiar with my builds. So if you do want to maximize mitigation in a single trial, single piece of content, you will need to shift some red CP points around. So we have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. That's pretty much it for the build information. So again, pretty nice overall, especially when you have the Shadow Silk synergy. So sometimes bow builds will be asked to run the Shadow Silk synergy, in which case, very similarly to if you want to put in Killer's Blade or anything, you would just drop a Dark Shade, or you can even drop one of the Fighter Skill abilities on the front bar here if you want to run something like Shadow Silk. If you have multiple bow builds and you want to maximize your overall DPS, you would be running something like Spiders. Normally it'd be one of the support roles, but sometimes, depending on your raid lead, obviously, you might want to run Spiders as well, just to maximize how many synergies that you're able to get and overall maximize your group DPS that way. So the rotation itself is actually fairly simple, but before we get started with that, I will very quickly make some more poisons. So again, this is the Double Ravage Health poisons we have on our front bar. Pretty simple, pretty cheap I should say. Fleshfly Larva, Nightshade Nirnroot. Again, very cheap ingredients to make overall, so definitely recommend using them if you got them. So the rotation, again, fairly easy. There's not much that you have to maintain. It's basically your back bar dots, so Caltrops, Poison Injection, and this Hail. And then just use your bow proc. Again, it's very similar to the Nightblade, dual wield blow Nightblade build, where you just want to use your bow proc on cooldown. And then obviously there's no execute. We're not using Killer's Blade at all, so we're actually no change at all when we get into execute. We're not obviously using Killer's Blade. So you're just going to keep on using focused aim throughout the entirety of the parse here. So very, very simple. Dark Shade's a little bit awkward to get used to because you do need to, it's a 20-second cooldown, which is a little bit weird. But basically, more or less, if you keep up your siphoning attacks here, because this Leeching Strikes, it also has a 20-second cooldown. So if you just maintain that with Dark Shade, you should be in a good spot here. So we are going to be assuming that you're playing at range, so we will be backing up quite a bit here. So because of the bow passive, that allows us to do more damage the further away we are. Over here, the long shots, we do want to be pretty much as far away as we possibly can. So focused aim does have quite a very, very long range here. The shortest range ability that you have is going to be, I believe it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be Endless Hail, which has a 25-meter range, but also it's a 5-meter radius, so that's about 30 meters. So you can be pretty far back. You can be about 28 meters out and still be able to hit the enemy. So just try to be as far away as you possibly can. I believe the bow proc is also 28 meters as well for the actual bow itself, the bow proc itself. So that's pretty much more or less where you want to be. Basically as far away as you possibly can, just so you get the maximum amount of damage out of your focused aim. So we will be doing this 21 million dummy parse, so this does give us all the raid buffs, your standard raid buffs. It's going to be a little bit inflated compared to an actual raid scenario because we are getting 100% major force uptime, which is impossible in an actual raid environment. But that being said, you can sort of take this parse and kind of compare it to what Magicka builds are also pulling if you'd like. It's not really a fair comparison because this is still a stamina build compared to a Magicka build. So it's not really like a one-to-one comparison, but it does kind of give you an idea of where a bow build kind of stands in terms of overall ranged DPS. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So remember, if you are using Lokkestiiz, that you will need to use only synergies while you're on your front bar. If you're running Lokkestiiz front bar. I hit my bow proc a little bit earlier there. So one thing that I am doing that I probably shouldn't be doing is using... Well, let's focus on the back bar, because I do want the additional penetration from Tzogvin, so don't do that. Make sure to use the bow proc on your front bar, not your back bar like I'm doing here like an idiot. So you can see here just from the stamina that we're using up, very easy to sustain this. So one thing to keep in mind if you're as you're running this build is that because focused aim is a channeled ability, you can't use potions while you're channeling it. That's like the third or fourth time I've used that early. I do believe you can still use synergies while you're channeling, but don't quote me on that. You might need to... be out of the channel in order to use synergies. Again, very simple rotation, very easy to maintain. It's not necessarily going to give you the most DPS, especially compared to something like a Lyco's build, where he is using things like Incapacitating Strike and Killer's Blade. But you'll be able to compare this to yourself to other Magicka builds. So there we go, that is the Bow build. Let me just throw these out so we're not drawn to combat again. So the DPS meter on the bottom was probably a little bit off, so here's the actual DPS we managed to pull. So 76.9k, we're going to round up to about 77k or so. So pretty strong overall. Obviously not going to be quite as strong as a dual wield bow build. Those are still going to be the best option if you want to play stamina DPS. But this does allow you to play at range. It's competitive with other Magicka builds. I should say Magicka builds in general. That being said, Magicka Templars and some Magicka Sorc builds are going to be able to pull a little bit higher than you. But if you want to main a stamina DPS, then Bow builds are very, very strong. And also keep in mind that this is without any Spider Silk synergies. If we had Spider Silk synergies, we would be doing a little bit more DPS. Even though it has been nerfed, so it's not doing a crazy amount of additional DPS, it's still quite strong. So if we did have Spider Silk synergies going, this DPS would be even higher. And because it does scale better with stamina CPs, it does poison damage after all. So it scales off of all of those CPs, your stamina CPs. It is going to be stronger on a stamina DPS compared to a Magicka DPS. So it's just something you want to keep in mind as well if you do decide to go with the Bow build as your ranged build of choice. So that's going to be it for this build video. If you guys have any questions about the build, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. I normally don't play Bow build as my stamina DPS, but I know several people who do use Bow builds fairly frequently, so I can certainly ask them for any answers to any questions you guys might have. Again, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.